Mrs. Elisa had long dreamed of flying, and today that dream was finally coming true. Little did she know, this momentous occasion would be marked by a life-changing encounter. As she stood in the bustling Confins Airport in Belo Horizonte, she felt a wave of excitement and nervousness wash over her. With trembling hands, she gazed at the massive airplanes outside, awestruck by their size and grandeur. Whispering to herself, she marveled at the sight she never thought she'd witness. My goodness, this metal bird is going to fly all the way up there and not fall. The anxiety of flying for the first time was overwhelming, and she couldn't help but wonder what it would be like to soar through the skies. This journey had a special purpose. Mrs. Elisa was traveling to Serra to visit her brother and nephew, who had lived there for many years. It had been a decade since she last saw them, as her brother, a businessman in the fishing industry, had moved to another state. With the years passing by, Elisa feared that her connection with her nephews was fading, and she was eager to rekindle their bond. She knew her nephews were now grown, likely around 25 years old, and she longed to reunite with them. While waiting to board her flight, Elisa received a call from her brother. He was curious to know what time she would arrive. With a touch of humor, she replied, "Oh, Herculino, look at what you're making me do. Take one of these metal trains just to see you in Serra. You better have lots of fried fish waiting for me to make up for it." Her brother laughed heartily on the other end of the line and asked, "Have you boarded yet?" "Not yet, but soon. I'll be there tonight," she answered, her voice laced with a hint of nervousness. As the conversation with her brother continued, Elisa wandered over to the airport cafe, observing the hustle and bustle around her. The sight of travelers rushing by and the constant movement only heightened her sense of unease. Her hands trembled as she imagined what awaited her aboard that airplane, her mind racing with both excitement and fear. Amidst the cafe's chaos, however, something caught her eye. A little girl, no more than 5 years old, happily skipping by with a toy airplane in hand. Elisa's gaze followed the child, and her thoughts turned inward, flooded with emotion. "You always wanted to fly when you were little, didn't you, my daughter?" she thought. For a brief moment, her eyes welled with tears. "I wish you were here with me," she whispered, thinking of her daughter, whom she hadn't seen in over 25 years. The pain of that loss still haunted her, a wound that never fully healed. Just then, the soft voice of the airport announcer interrupted her thoughts. "Passengers for flight 2795, please proceed to the boarding gate." The time had come. Elisa stood up, heart pounding, unaware of the extraordinary surprise that awaited her on that flight. Once inside the massive plane, she found her seat and settled in, though the unease inside her only grew stronger. Seated with her hands clenched together, she looked around, searching for a sense of calm, but finding none. Her mind raced with thoughts. I'm here. Everything will be fine." She repeated the words like a mantra, desperately trying to comfort herself as her fear of flying crept closer. The flight attendants began detailing safety procedures, and Elisa's attention was drawn to the stewardess in front of her, explaining the instructions. There was something reassuring about the young woman, her confidence, her calmness, as if she was in control of this enormous metal bird. She must fly all day, right? Thought Elisa, so it must be safe. The plane won't fall. She clung to that belief, trying to convince herself that she was in good hands, even though her heart pounded wildly in her chest, and the tension never fully left. When the plane finally took off, Mrs. Elisa gripped her seat tightly, feeling the acceleration and the slight turbulence. She was clearly tense, struggling to relax. She closed her eyes and took deep breaths, trying to soothe her nerves. But as soon as she peeked out of the window and saw the view above the clouds, with the cities below shrinking into a tiny patchwork, she realized how breathtaking it all was. "Jesus, it's truly magnificent," she whispered softly, captivated by the beauty that unfolded before her. Once the plane leveled out and reached cruising altitude, the flight attendants began offering drinks and snacks. The stewardess responsible for Elisa's row approached with a warm smile. Elisa, still a bit nervous, requested a cup of tea. As she watched the young woman prepare the drink, something about her presence put Elisa at ease. It was as if the woman exuded a familiarity that Elisa couldn't quite place. When the stewardess handed her the tea, Elisa looked in her eyes and felt a surge of emotion. The woman was stunningly beautiful, her eyes kind and comforting. Elisa couldn't help but compliment her, saying, "You have the most beautiful smile, my dear." The stewardess returned the compliment with a radiant smile, but as their eyes met, something stirred deep within Elisa's heart. Could it be? There was something familiar about the young woman, something that tugged at memories Elisa had buried long ago. Could this be the daughter she had lost all those years ago, now standing before her as a stranger, yet somehow so familiar? Elisa's heart skipped a beat as the possibility struck her like lightning, setting the stage for a reunion she had never dreamed possible, 35,000 feet in the air. With an equally radiant smile, the flight attendant responded, "Oh, thank you so much. You're wonderful as well." In that moment, a genuine connection formed between them, as if they had shared an unspoken bond. Just then, the gentle voice of the pilot echoed through the speakers, informing the passengers that they might experience some turbulence, but reassuring them that the flight would be smooth overall. Mrs. Elisa's expression shifted instantly as a wave of anxiety washed over her. It was her first time on a plane, and the thought of turbulence only heightened her fear. The flight attendant noticed Elisa's unease and, with a compassionate smile, asked, "Is everything all right, dear?" Elisa, trying to laugh off her rising panic, replied, "My dear, I've never flown before. To be honest, I'm scared out of my wits." She giggled nervously, hoping to ease the tension. The flight attendant's face softened with empathy. "There's no need to worry," she said warmly. "I fly every day, and I promise you, flying through the sky, among the clouds, is an incredible experience if you allow yourself to enjoy it." Her reassuring smile had a calming effect on Elisa, who found herself trusting this young woman almost instinctively. Something about this flight attendant made Elisa feel lighter, like a weight was being lifted off her shoulders. "You're in very good hands, I assure you," the young woman added with a playful wink. Leaning closer, she whispered, "And just so you know, the pilot is my husband." The comment made Elisa laugh out loud, which in turn helped dissipate some of her nerves. The flight attendant's warmth and humor turned the daunting experience of flying into something a bit more enjoyable for Elisa. She even began to relax, allowing herself to appreciate the journey. As the flight progressed and everything seemed to be going smoothly, Elisa watched the flight attendants moving gracefully up and down the aisles, attending to passengers. There were still a few hours left before they would land in Sarah, and Elisa began to enjoy the experience of flying. She chatted briefly with the passenger across the aisle and indulged in the onboard meal, savoring the small joys of the journey. All seemed well until, unexpectedly, the plane hit a patch of turbulence. The sudden jolt was enough to make Elisa panic. Her heart raced, and she clutched the armrests, her fear surging once more. We're falling. The plane is going to crash." Elisa gasped through tears, her voice trembling as she squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the worst. Seeing her distress, the flight attendant rushed over, gently taking Elisa's hand. "It's all right," she said softly, trying to comfort her. "These bumps are completely normal. I promise you, the plane is safe, even when it shakes like this." Despite the attendant's comforting words, the turbulence seemed to intensify, and the plane continued to shake. The pilot's voice came over the intercom once more, advising all passengers to return to their seats and fasten their seatbelts. Noticing how scared and alone Elisa was, the flight attendant knelt beside her, holding her hand tightly. "Don't worry, Mrs. Elisa. Whenever I'm really scared, even when I wake up from a nightmare in the middle of the night, do you know what I do?" she asked gently. Through her fear, Elisa, still trembling, asked, "What do you do?" "I sing. There's a song that always calms me down. It's something very special to me, something someone dear used to sing to me," the young woman explained, her voice full of emotion. In that moment, Elisa had no idea what was about to unfold. As the flight attendant began to sing, the melody filled the air, soft and soothing. Elisa, though terrified, listened intently. Her heart began to beat faster, not from fear, but from recognition. This was no ordinary song. She knew it down to the very last note. No, it can't be, Elisa thought to herself, her mind racing as the young woman's voice washed over her. The melody was the very same lullaby Elisa had made up for her own daughter, a song she used to sing when her little girl was scared, had nightmares, or was frightened by a storm. Elisa's breath caught in her throat, and she stared at the young woman in shock. Could it really be her daughter, the child she lost more than 25 years ago? Time seemed to stand still as Elisa's mind was flooded with memories, taking her back to that terrible day. She had been a young, single mother at the time, just 35 years old. It was her daughter Morgana's 5th birthday, and Elisa had taken her to the park for a special Cinderella-themed event. The park was packed with children, food stalls, and excited families. Elisa had warned her daughter repeatedly not to let go of her hand. "Stay with me, Momo. Don't wander off, or you'll get lost," she had said anxiously. At one point, Morgana had gotten hungry, and they joined a long line to buy some pastries. While waiting, an old friend of Elisa's from school spotted her, and they began to chat. Distracted by the conversation, Elisa didn't notice how quiet Morgana had become. But when she finally turned to look at her daughter, the little girl was gone. That moment was a mother's worst nightmare. Elisa and her friend frantically searched the park, calling out for Morgana, but she was nowhere to be found. They rushed to the local police station, where they reviewed the park's security footage. But due to the crowd and Morgana's small stature, it was impossible to track her movements. The park had blind spots, and it was filled with people. Days turned into weeks, but Morgana was never found. Elisa was devastated, consumed by guilt and sorrow. She blamed herself for being distracted, for not holding on tighter. Her brother Herculino had been her rock through it all, but their family had been poor, and they couldn't afford to continue the expensive search efforts or hire private detectives. To make matters worse, after several months, the police declared Morgana legally deceased, though Elisa never believed it. She was convinced her daughter was still alive, somewhere. That uncertainty ate away at her for years. After her brother and his family moved to Serra, Elisa remained in Belo Horizonte, alone and heartbroken, never giving up hope of one day finding her daughter. Now, aboard this plane, as the young flight attendant finished the lullaby, Elisa was no longer thinking about the turbulence. Her focus had shifted entirely to the origins of that song. With her voice shaking and her eyes brimming with tears, she asked, "Where did you learn that song, dear?" The flight attendant, unaware of the emotional storm brewing inside Elisa, smiled kindly and replied, "It may sound strange, but it's a song I've known for as long as I can remember. Someone very special used to sing it to me when I was little." Elisa was left utterly speechless. The flight attendant went on to explain that ever since she was a little girl, she had dreams of a woman with red hair and green eyes who would calm her whenever she had nightmares. In those dreams, the woman would sing a soft lullaby, the same song that seemed to soothe her even when things felt hopeless. Every time I was scared or had a bad dream, it was like this woman was there with me, comforting me when I needed it most, she said with a nostalgic smile. Tears welled up in Elisa's eyes as she listened, her heart racing. She could barely contain the emotion that was surging inside her. With a trembling voice, she asked, "And what's your name, my dear?" The flight attendant smiled warmly, oblivious to the life-altering moment about to unfold. "My name is Morgana." Elisa's world came crashing down in the most extraordinary way. "Oh my God," she whispered, as tears streamed uncontrollably from her eyes. There was no doubt in her heart that the young woman standing before her was none other than her long-lost daughter, the child she had been grieving for over 25 years. Morgana, sensing the deep emotional shift in Elisa, was moved, though still unsure of what was happening. "Ma'am, are you all right?" she asked gently, noticing Elisa's overwhelming reaction. Through her sobs, Elisa finally managed to utter the words that had been trapped in her heart for years. "It's me, my daughter. It's me, your mother." Morgana froze in place, her eyes widening in disbelief. She stared deeply into Elisa's eyes, as if searching for some thread of memory, some forgotten connection that could confirm the impossible. Her mind raced, trying to process the magnitude of what was happening. Elisa's voice trembled with emotion as she continued. "Do you remember, my love? The park on your 5th birthday. We went to the park." Suddenly, a flash of recognition lit up Morgana's eyes. She whispered, almost breathless, "Mom, is it really you?" Without another word, the two women threw themselves into each other's arms, sobbing with joy and disbelief. It was a reunion that defied words. Mother and daughter, torn apart by tragic circumstances, now miraculously brought back together, thousands of feet in the air. Tears of joy rolled down their faces as they clung to one another, the years of heartache and separation melting away in that single embrace. The other passengers and flight attendants, witnessing the profoundly emotional scene, watched in awe. Slowly, applause began to fill the cabin, the clapping of hands symbolizing not just the reunion of two souls, but a celebration of hope, love, and the incredible turns that life can take. The spontaneous applause felt like a collective acknowledgement of the extraordinary moment, a recognition that sometimes, even in the most unlikely of places, life can offer a second chance. Elisa held her daughter tightly, unable to believe that the reunion she had dreamed of for decades was actually happening. "I knew it, my love. I knew you were alive. I always knew it," she whispered between sobs, her voice full of gratitude and relief. Morgana, still overwhelmed, explained what had happened to her on that fateful day in the park. "I followed a woman dressed as Cinderella, and before I knew it, I was lost. I looked everywhere for you, Mom, but I couldn't find you. You were gone," swallowed by the crowd. Morgana's voice trembled as she recalled the fear and confusion of that day. "I cried in a corner, too scared to move. It wasn't long before a kind couple found me. The man picked me up, and he and his wife spent hours searching the park, trying to find you. But I was so young, I couldn't give them much information. No name, no phone number, no address. As the days turned into weeks, and no one came forward to claim the little girl, the couple, unable to locate her family, made the decision to adopt her. Morgana was raised in comfort and luxury, something that Elisa, given her financial struggles at the time, could never have provided. The couple gave her a loving home, and Morgana grew up happy, surrounded by care and affection. But the memory of her mother never left her. "Even as a child," Morgana continued, "I turned the trauma of losing you into something else. You became a figure in my dreams, a vision of a red-haired woman with green eyes, always singing that song. I had no idea that song would one day bring me back to you." Elisa listened, her heart breaking and healing at the same time. "I never gave up hope, not even for a second," she whispered, holding Morgana's hand tightly. "I always believed that you were out there somewhere, alive." The turbulence that had caused so much panic earlier now seemed insignificant. All that mattered was the reunion taking place on that airplane. As the flight began its descent, the emotional weight of their reunion hung in the air. Both women, after 25 long years of separation, were finally together again. When the plane touched down after what had become the most life-altering flight either of them had ever experienced, Elisa and Morgana remained close, their hands intertwined as if they were afraid to let go again. This was the beginning of a new chapter, one neither of them had expected but had longed for in their hearts. Intercambiaron contactos prometiendo encontrarse nuevamente y comenzar a construir una relación que había sido interrumpida. La noticia se propagó rápidamente por el aeropuerto de Ceará, donde todos celebraban la increíble vuelta del destino y la unión de una madre y su hija. Algún tiempo después de vuelta en Belo Horizonte, Morgana presentó a su esposo, el piloto del avión, y su familia a su madre, con quienes compartieron una emocionante reunión. La señora conoció a los padres adoptivos de su hija y no tenía palabras para expresar cuán agradecía que cuidaran de su niña. Cuando no pudo hacerlo, los padres también estaban felices de ver a Morgana reunirse con su madre biológica y comprendieron que una parte importante de la vida de su hija había vuelto a ella. El reencuentro entre ambas continuó siendo una experiencia increíble, con años de actualizaciones, historias y recuerdos para compartir. Fue un desafío para ambas entender que después de tanto tiempo ahora finalmente podrían ser parte de la Vida la una de la otra después de todo, aunque fueran madre e hija, también eran extrañas que necesitaban conocerse nuevamente. La señora sintió una inmensa alegría en su alma al darse cuenta de que ya no estaba sola, su hija había vuelto a su vida y el hecho de que Morgana también viviera en Belo Horizonte era una bendición adicional. Elisa estaba radiante al descubrir que se había convertido en abuela. La aeromoza y su esposo tenían 2 hijos, un niño y una niña que ahora serían los nietos preciosos de la señora. Esto solo aumentó su felicidad, ya que estaba rodeada de amor y familia, algo que deseaba desde hacía mucho tiempo. Lo que no pudo vivir con su hija, tal vez ahora podría vivirlo con sus nietos. La vida de esa anciana de repente estaba llena de encuentros familiares, cenas en familia y ocasiones especiales que compartía con Morgana, su yerno y sus nietos, y todo esto sucedió debido a un simple viaje en avión que al final demostró que cosas increíbles pueden suceder no importa cuántas turbulencias en la vida tengamos que enfrentar. Si te gustó esta historia, seguramente la próxima que está apareciendo aquí en tu pantalla también te sorprenderá y emocionarán de nuestras próximas historias emocionantes. Un abrazo y hasta nuestra próxima historia.